If you are still using legacy authentication methods in your Microsoft 365 environment, then you should be looking at migrating those methods to the new Authentication Methods Policies. Microsoft will be deprecating the legacy authentication methods in September 2025. So you should start planning how to actually migrate your legacy authentication methods to the new Authentication Methods Policy. And that's exactly what we are going to look into the video, how to basically migrate your legacy authentication methods both for your MFA and SSPR into the new Authentication Methods Policy. So let's go check it out. So first of all, we need to understand what is Legacy MFA. If you go to your environment, if you log on to entra.microsoft.com, you can click on Users and then click All Users. And then from there, you can click on Per User MFA. When you do that, it actually takes you to the multi-factor authentication settings, which are the legacy settings. So once you are on this page, we're going to click on Service Settings. Under Service Settings, if you happen to see different methods which are configured, so for example, I have call to phone, text messages to phone, notification through app. These are all enabled, which means my multi-factor authentication MFA is actually still using the legacy authentication methods, right? So this is for MFA. Now, if you're wondering how to get to this page, obviously one way to get to this page is coming through your Entra portal and then click on Users and All Users, and then you can click on Per User MFA. The other way to get to this page is if you log on to your Microsoft 365 portal, then you can click on Users and then Active Users, and then from there you can click on Multi-Factor Authentication, which will basically take you to the same page where you can then click on Service Settings, and that's your Legacy MFA page. Okay, so now let's have a look at the SSPR, which is Self-Service Password Reset, right? If you have enabled SSPR in your tenancy, then obviously if you haven't been using the modern authentication methods, then obviously you might be using the legacy SSPR's policies, right? So if you log on to your Entra portal and then scroll down, and under protection, click on password reset. Now under password reset, we then click on authentication methods, and I can see that there are some methods which I'm actually using, which is a mobile app code and mobile phone. So again, these are the legacy authentication methods which I have been using. Now you would say, why are we calling these legacy authentication methods? Under protection, if you then click on authentication methods again, you would see that there is actually a migration piece. It says on 30th of September 2025, the legacy multi-factor authentication and self-service password reset policies will be deprecated. So you will have to migrate in any case. The other benefit of migrating to the new authentication method policies is that you will then have a combined experience for both the SSPR and for your MFA. So with the current setup, we actually have different methods set up both for the MFA and SSPR, which means your users are basically doing different sort of authentication methods for each of the functionality. So for password resets, they might be using mobile app code and mobile phone, but for MFA, they might be using notifications through the mobile app or text to messages. So these are two different authentication methods they are currently using with current setup. But once you migrate, then it will basically be just one combined experience. Before we start talking about migrating, let's have a look at what actually happens with the current setup. So I'm going to log in with a user in an incognito window, and that user is actually using MFA using the legacy settings, right? So Chris Green is using MFA, and that's the behavior before we even migrate. Okay, so I'm going to click next. I'm going to log in as Chris Green, and let me just type in the password. So currently I'm actually getting a number matching MFA. I've got a request on my phone, so I'm just going to approve this and just say yes. So we are signed in, right? So this is the MFA experience that I'm actually currently getting. We need to now migrate to the new authentication methods policies. Well, you might be thinking, is that a complex process? Well, it's not. It's really straightforward. There are few steps involved that you need to be mindful of, but other than that, it's pretty simple. The very first thing that you need to do before you even start migrating is basically you need to note down what sort of authentication methods you are actually using for each of these services. I mean, let's just talk about MFA first. So that's my legacy MFA. So I'm actually using call to phone, text messages, and notifications, right? 3 authentication methods. So if I go back to my authentication methods, which is the new one, all 3 can be covered using Microsoft Authenticator, which gives me, all the notifications through the app, an SMS, and a voice call, right? So I can cover these 3. And then you need to go back and review your SSPR settings, the methods that you are currently using. So I'm currently using mobile phone and mobile app code. Now, both of these can actually be used when you call mobile app. You need to decide whether you want to have SMS or voice call. One thing you need to decide is, although with the current setup you might be using different sort of methods, but when you migrate, you need to combine these methods. So for example, if I enable Microsoft Authenticator and SMS, right, then which means both of these methods will be used by your SSPR and to conduct MFA by your users. You cannot have different methods. So you need to decide before migrating that if you are using, for example, you might be using Office phone, right? Or let's just say you might be using security questions. The security questions is actually a different example. Let's talk about something else first before I talk about security questions, okay? So let's just say email, for example. You're using email for SSPR, and for your MFA, you are just using, let's just say, call to phone, right? So one is using email, one is using call to phone. When you migrate, you need to decide which one to enable, because that one will be used by both of these. Or you can actually enable both, which means your users will then be able to satisfy your password reset and MFA through both of these options, right? So you need to review the authentication methods used in the existing situation, and then probably come up with the combined methods that you would be using for both of these services in the new authentication method policies. Okay, let's talk about security questions, for example. Now, security questions, if you are using security questions is not yet available within the new authentication methods policies. So if you are using security questions, you can keep using security questions and migrate the other methods. And when we have the security questions available within the new authentication method policies, then you will be able to migrate. That would be a very simple process, right? So you can basically keep using this and the security questions if you have security questions. Now let's talk about migrations. So let's go back to the authentication methods. You need to click on manage migration. If in your case, if it might be pre-migration, then you need to click on migration in progress. So you need to select this method and click save. So when you have this option in place, and if you have enabled Microsoft Authenticator, or maybe let's just say voice call, for example, right? Then the voice call method can actually be used both for the MFA authentication and SSPR. So it will start basically looking at the policies, authentication method policies, which are under this section. Plus, it will also respect your legacy policies if you have in place. Okay. So the second step, obviously, you need to select this option and click save. Okay, right? So once you have done that, then what we need to do is we need to then go back to our legacy multi-factor authentication. I previously had 3 of these selected, right? Let's just say we want to migrate these notifications through mobile app first. Okay, so I'm going to then basically go back to my authentication methods first, and I'm going to click on the Microsoft Authenticator. Under Microsoft Authenticator, you need to enable this setting. So once you enable this, you have an option to enable this for all the users, or you can create selected groups that you want to apply this to. So what I have done is I basically created a group called MFA group, which is a Microsoft 365 group, and I have added Chris Green into that group because right now I don't want to apply this to all the users. So I'm going to then target the MFA group which I have created, and I have Chris Green into that group, and select. And from the authentication methods, authentication mode, I would select any. It could be a passwordless or push. So I select any in the authentication mode, and I then click save. So what I have just done is I basically enabled the Microsoft Authenticator method both for the SSPR and for the MFA, right? So I have created this one here. Now I need to go back to my legacy MFA, and I will then click untick this option because I have already enabled this option in my authentication methods policy, and then I click save. So by doing this, I'm saying that I am not using this legacy notification MFA method, but I'm now going to use this Microsoft Authenticator method through the authentication methods, right? So I have done this. Similarly, one by one, you need to test and start enabling the other methods that you currently have in your MFA, legacy MFA, or in your SSPR. Okay, so I've got this mobile app code, so I will disable this one from there, from the SSPR, and click on save. All right. So once you have done that, let's just do it for the other methods. By the way, when you do this, make sure you keep testing these methods as well, right? So talking about tested, let's test the MFA for Chris Green, and let's see if anything happens to the behavior that Chris Green actually did the MFA. So I'm now going to open another window in incognito mode, and I'm just going to say new incognito window, and I'm going to go to office.com. So from office.com, Chris Green is already logged in, so I'm just going to close these windows and probably open a new window, new incognito, and go to office.com, and then we're going to sign in as Chris Green and click next and put the password. And I now got the MFA prompt on my phone. So the reason I'm showing you this is that there is no interruption to your user's experience, right? So when you enable the new MFA policies, your users won't see any difference. The only difference would be for the users or the organizations who are still using the On-Prem MFA Server for their multi-factor authentication. And the difference for those would be that instead of your users getting prompted for the number matching, which is right, I got prompted for a number on the screen, which was 84, and then I had to select that number. So that number matching is not actually available to the users or organizations who are using MFA through On-Prem MFA Server. So those organizations might still get a prompt to approve the request rather than doing the number matching, right? So that would be the difference for the organizations who are using on-prem MFA servers for their multi-factor authentication, right? But if you are already using cloud MFA, then there is not much difference that your users will basically see. Now, by doing this, we've simply migrated one of the authentication methods. So similarly, what you can do is we can then have a look what other methods we have. So for example, we have email, we have mobile phone. So I'm going to go back to my MFA and I'm going to go, so we have the email which is already enabled. So I'm going to enable the SMS as well. And this time we're going to enable this and we're going to target the MFA group. If you want these methods to be the sign-in method for the first time when they, when your users try to log on to Microsoft 365, if you want this method before you use it as a sign-in method, then you can tick this option. But I want to keep that to the users, so I won't enable this option. But so once you have enabled the SMS, and I'm going to select save. So we've just enabled the SMS. And the other thing which I would do is look at my Legacy MFA. So SMS we have enabled, so we can untick this, and then we have call to phone. So which is like a voice call, right? So if I go to authentication methods and I can then enable voice call, let's enable this option and we're going to target the MFA group users, which Chris Green is part of this group, and I'm going to click save. So by doing this, basically now using these three methods, which is enabled, yes, one is the Microsoft Authenticator, SMS, voice call, and email OTP, right? I'm using 4 of these methods, which will be used as a combined methods for my SSPR and for my multi-factor authentication. So I'm now going to go back to my Legacy MFA and basically untick that option, right? Now, when you untick this option, you might see this message which says, select at least one verification method, right? This is because it just takes some time to get refreshed. So what we can do is let's just select something and click save, and then you can come back to this page after some time, and at that time it will give you a different message, right? So let's just leave it for now and we go back to our SSPR. And because we have already enabled these methods into our new authentication methods policies, so we are going to now disable these two, right? And guess what? I'm actually getting the same prompt again. So let's just enable one and click save. And you probably have to come back to this page so that it knows that you have enabled the other methods in your main authentication methods policy, right? So let me just refresh that page again and let's see if it's actually got the new information. So untick that, right? Okay. So now we untick this option. And now this is actually telling me that disabling all authentication methods could lock out your users, ensure that you have enough authentication methods enabled in the new authentication methods policy, which we have already done, right? So at this point, we can now click on save. So once we click on save, updates are done. And if we then refresh this page and let's see if it has saved yep. So great. Now none of these methods are in use. We will do the same for our SSPR. So let me refresh the screen. Hopefully it might have worked out that we are not using this method. So I'm going to untick this option and there you go. So it's now letting me save this option and it's just telling me that before saving, confirm your users have enough methods, which we already have covered in the new authentication methods policy. And I'm going to click save, right? So once you have done that, you have basically migrated your authentication methods from the Legacy MFA and SSPR. there is another step that we need to perform, right? So once you have done that, we will go back to our authentication methods, and let's just refresh our screen, just so that everything is clean, right? Okay, so now you have to click, if you are happy, just leave it for some time, let your users use this new experience. They won't see the difference, but just in case if you encounter any issue, then obviously you can enable the policies on the legacy MFA and just troubleshoot. But if you are happy, then you need to click on manage migration again, and then you need to click on migration complete, and then click save. So as soon as you click on this save, it basically will say that, okay, use policy for authentication and SSPR, so which is this, and ignore legacy policies. So if you have anything enabled in your legacy policies, it will simply ignore those policies and will only use the policies which are described under this authentication methods policies. If you are using security questions though, I would recommend leaving this to migration in progress and migrate everything else except the security questions from your SSPR, because security questions is not yet available within your authentication methods. But you can do migration in progress, and obviously slowly enable the other methods, doing what we have recently done. And once you have the security questions available, then you can enable those security questions under the authentication method policies, and then you can click on migration complete so that you have completely migrated. Okay. If you don't have the security questions, if you are not using the security questions in SSPR currently, and you have done all of the steps, migrated all the methods, then you can click on migration complete and click on save. And once you click on save, it will basically disable these checkboxes within your legacy MFA policies, right? So I'm not going to click save as yet, because I might be making more videos on this topic, but this is how you basically complete the migration. Well, that's it for today. I hope you learned something new, and hopefully you can migrate your legacy authentication methods to the new authentication methods policy in your Microsoft 365. If you liked the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and if you have any comments, put them below in the comment section, and I hope to see you again.